Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. What we've been going through is the Ezra Apocalypse, and we've given a little bit of history each time we've went through. So let's go ahead and start that. Tonight's going to be kind of interesting. This is our Ezra Apocalypse. It's called Second Ezra in the King James 1611, part of the Apocrypha in the middle part. It's probably the only book that actually has prophecy, at least what we would be interested in. And again, not part of the original Old Testament, but something very important. And as we go through all the church history manuscripts, we keep seeing more and more canons that have the Ezra Apocalypse as listed. And when we get to chapters 11 and 12, we want to look through that very carefully because it has to do with things, prophecy today. One of the things that most people realize, and this is kind of a side note, but that most people realize is that Ezekiel 38 and 39 talks about the battle of a country called Magog that attacks Israel. And it's right toward the end. They get destroyed, and then there's probably, in the aftermath of that, 10 nations that rise up. We're also told that the Roman Empire falls, and then when it falls, 10 nations rise up. So we have to figure out basically what this, where the Roman Empire is. Because if it's been gone for 80 years or 50 years, we should have 10 nations, and we don't seem to. Maybe they're developing right now, but there's something behind the scenes that we're missing. And this seems to indicate the rise of Russia as being part of the old Roman Empire, which sounds strange at first, but there's some very interesting things about that. If that's the case, Russia becomes a superpower, basically. Well, it is a superpower, but more so, and comes down to attack Israel. That is probably not a very good possibility right now because of the war with Ukraine, because of Europe, because of Trump, and several other things. But that still could facilitate them coming down to get oil if Israel had tons of oil. So right now they would be probably attacking someone else. So at this point, with the Ezra Apocalypse, we're going to see in a few weeks, it looks like Russia mounts up, attacks and either destroys or attacks and controls, takes over, something like that, at least part of Europe to become a major power, which is the reason why a lot of us looking at these prophecies have thought the globalists are a major problem right now. At that point, they wouldn't be. I always looked at it like we don't do anything. We're almost taken over by globalists. But with the rise of the empire again, they're kind of squished. Either that or they become very friendly with the empire. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. But some very interesting things, especially right now looking at the news with what Russia's doing and what Trump is doing and what the United Nations are doing, kind of going back and forth with things that should be obvious. But so anyway, we'll get to that eventually. Right now, we're looking at some other interesting things, end-time prophecies from Ezra. So let's look at this again. Basically, well, let's just run it down this way. It's easier to see. The first and second chapters were about the judgment of Israel and the resurrection, the establishment of the kingdoms. And we actually saw a pre-trib rapture. Actually, I take that back. It wasn't pre-trib. It was just the rapture. So it didn't say anything about the timing per se. Just that there's a rapture. There's a 7-year tribulation period. It appears to be pre, but just a brief mention of it. Now, later on down, we're going to see some very clear signs of a pre-trib rapture from this. And there's actually many other scrolls. Anyway, but that's beside the point. So we saw that. So chapters 1 and 2, a lot of people were saying it was probably an addition because it seems to be anti-Semitic. And it's not really. It's just as anti-Semitic as the minor prophets. Israel had done bad things. God had sent a judgment. They were going to be in Babylon 70 years. That's not anti-Semitic. That's anti-tyrant government is basically what's going on. Anyway, so this is that. And what everyone agrees with is chapters 3 to 15 as being unquestionably the Ezra Apocalypse from way back when. So we went through 3 and 4, and it basically talks about the questions that he's asking God, the sin nature, and why is Israel destroyed? No matter how you look at it, Israel's got to be better than Babylon. And in a sense, that's true. So why is God doing what he's doing? This kind of thing. We went through and we got into chapter 4, and we saw the 3 challenges and the questions. And it boils down to God has a plan. If you stop feeling sorry for yourself, pay attention to prophecy and look, maybe you'll figure it out, in which case you'll be much happier. But on the flip side of that, you could just simply trust that God has a plan, and it can't end like this because that would contradict prophecy. And so something's got to come with this. And so it's going to happen. And so those were the questions. And then we got to the riddle of time. We're going to look at chapter 5 today, at least part of it. So if we go to the riddle of time, just to remind you, and this is pretty interesting. The question is, because he's going to ask, when is the kingdom coming? And of course, can't answer that. So he asks a different question. Look at the time, or the angel says this to him, look at the time at the beginning of creation, and what you long to see will be revealed to you. Okay, now that seems cryptic to us, but it's actually very, very simple. If you look at the original calendar, you will see patterns of dates, and everything will become clear to you. Everything that you could probably ask, you may not get like the rapture or the second coming or what the Gog-Magog invasion down to the minute and the second. They don't usually do that. They do it in sets of jubilees. So is it this 50 years, next 50 years, that kind of thing. And then sometimes for very important things, they break the jubilees up, not too often, but sometimes into the Shemitahs. So you get a 7-year period. So it's like saying that, it's sometime in this century, and then we boil it down to a decade. So very important for this. So then he does this, and he knows the calendar, much like we do if we study the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. And that's our dsscalendar.org. It's all from them. I can't really verify that it's real, true, or I did it right, or they did it right. It's just the way the scrolls have a calendar. But I've seen too many things that have come to pass on the same dates using that calendar. Doesn't fit with the modern Jewish, with Gregorian, with the Muslim calendar, or it does about the only ones that I look at, or the Julian calendar per se, with those patterns, the 7 sets of 7 years and the 50-year cycles and all that. But on that one, it does. So very, very interesting. So we want to pay attention to this. I'm just so amazed because I knew nothing about the calendar when I put this book together. This is just a modern English translation of the Ezra Apocalypse, which you can just grab a King James 1611 and it's in there. So, but you know how the King James 1611 is. If you're kind of not liking the King James in general, the 1611 is much worse, kind of like the Geneva 1599. Anyway. So he asked this question then, if that's the case, if we look at creation and the time periods, the calendar, it'll just give us all the dates of most of the things, and we can figure out most of the others. So he asked the question, okay, with that in mind, not sure when the kingdom is going to start per se. Is the amount of time from creation to the present longer than the amount of time from the present to the resurrection which is to come? So this is a little cryptic or a little confusing, because we know there's 2 resurrections. There's the resurrection that goes along with the rapture. That's probably the one he's referring to. But there's also the kingdom. And at the end of the 1,000-year kingdom, there is another resurrection, the great white throne judgment. So I could be talking about either one of those. And when you're talking about, let's get it down to give or take a couple of years, give or take a millennium, that, there's a little bit of a math problem there. So which one is he talking about? And basically what I thought about doing this, and I've got some speculation in the book, but it dawned on me after last week's broadcast, it's actually pretty simple when you think of the calendar system. He's doing this, and everybody debates on this, sometime in the 430s to 450s, maybe 460, 470, something like that, BC. Well, all of those dates are, according to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, are in the 70th Jubilee. And normally we just count Jubilees. So if you're looking at Jubilees to the first resurrection where the rapture occurs, there's been more time in the past than from that, the 70th Jubilee, up to the time when this happens. No matter if you run it all the way to the end of the 6,000 or the 7,000, still the time has passed. Now, he doesn't know for sure. It just means that the resurrection can't be another 3,000 years out or more. It's got to be less than a certain number. And of course, he asked the question, will I live long enough to see it? Maybe it's in the next, 5 years. Don't know. And of course, he says, I can tell you about the signs of the end times that you asked. About your life, I can't tell you anything. So basically, I thought this was interesting. We don't want to read too much into this, but this prophecy basically tells us that the 70th Jubilee from creation, which is when he was, according to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, has been more time from creation to them than from then to the resurrection. So we have a maximum time limit, and it can be any time before that. So that doesn't really help us find a date or a century or anything, but it gets us in the ballpark. Now, later on, he's going to give us another clue. As a matter of fact, let me just show you that real quick. We're not going to look at it today, but in chapter 6, Abraham is the key to dividing the ages. And that doesn't say much by itself either. But that with this one, and we'll come back and look at the two together, really points us to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar and begins to open up some really interesting things. So this is what he said, and that's the answer to it. And so now in chapter 5, he answers the first part of the question. Can you tell me the signs of the end? And can you tell me, will I live long enough to see them? And the answer to his life is like, I haven't come to tell you anything about your life, whether you're going to see any of this or not. But some of the signs I can tell you. Now, we remember Matthew 24 and several of those signs. Incidentally, I've been going through the Gospels from the really early Hebrew manuscripts, and they're almost identical, really. I mean, like whole large sections, but there are little comments, little just saying the same thing a slightly different way, which really has some amazing things to it. And we'll get to that here sometime in the near future too. Okay, so last days signs. And this is kind of what we want to look at least the first half of chapter 5. Concerning the signs, however, behold, in the last days, the inhabitants of the world will be taken in great number. Now, this could mean several things. We have a great number of people, but there's a large percentage of them that are taken somehow. And I don't think this is referring to the rapture per se. This is talking about most likely an apostasy. So if you think about it, even like in the Middle East, I remember looking at stats back during the empire, before the Ottoman Empire. I think it was like some 90% of Lebanon was Christian. Now it's like 98% Muslim. So it's completely flipped. So there's been a lot of places where people, and you may or may not consider the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, to be even Christian. They're at least Christian in name, at least. But somehow there is a major apostasy. And we're looking for a specific one that happens in the near future, but in general, there's always been apostasies. So the inhabitants of the world will be taken in great number. And because of that event, whatever it is, the way of truth is hidden. And the land will be barren of faith. So because of the Pharisee-Sadducee system, because of all this other stuff, the Middle Ages, a lot of truth has been hidden. The truth is now beginning to come back because of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And you and I as Christians, just going by the New Testament, it's not really new to us, most of it. Most of it is what we've been telling you, but it's from a different source than us. So that just makes a big difference in evangelism. So, but eventually this stuff changes. Iniquity will be worse than you see now, or what you heard of long ago. It talks about the whole idea of that time period, like this tribulation period, being a lot worse than it's ever been, and nothing will ever be that bad again. Kind of the same thing that we're seeing here. Notice, though, that it says iniquity. Iniquity is an interesting word. And sometimes it possibly is interchangeable, but basically the sin nature is what we think of as sin. So I get mad and I want to kill you. I get greedy and I want to steal from you. That's just kind of a natural thing. I don't have to be taught to steal or to hate or to injure. That just comes out of my sin nature. Iniquity, on the other hand, is a type of sin or a lifestyle that's taught by the fathers. Okay, like for instance, I might be liberal or conservative in our current system. Most people, because of the sin nature, would say, I really don't care. I'm going to say whatever it is that'll work so that I can sell my product and make money, right? Because I'm greedy. And so to see a company that should be greedy, wanting to sell stuff and make money, and you make more money if you sell good quality products, but that's another story, I guess. But at this point, to see them say, okay, we're going to be political and we're going to say this. Well, no matter what you say, you just alienated part of your group. You're going to be making less money now. So just to a normal sinner or a righteous person, either one, you're insane. That's not how you get anything. So, but that's learned behavior. And so in this case, we have the Sadducees and the Pharisees having their particular kind of tradition of the elders, their particular kind of oral Torah that becomes worse and worse and worse. And so it's a learned behavior. So it's interesting to see that. So there is a type of faith, the Abrahamic faith, that is an apostate version. And it's basically iniquity. It's been taught. You wouldn't normally just come up with that system all by yourself. So much like we all say we're Christian, but most of us wouldn't be in a Christian cult. If you're raised in it, it makes sense to you. But if you just walk into it, you'd look at it and go, you guys are crazy. So the iniquity part is always interesting. So when you see iniquity, realize it's sin, but it's a specific kind. It means someone has trained you, brainwashed you into something that's not even normal for a sinner. Not that it's maybe a whole lot worse. It's just weird, So it goes on and says, this land which bears rule now. Now, if this is actually Ezra, if it's before he's come back, then it's Babylon. If it's right after he's come back, it's Persia. So it's probably Persia in this time period, because he says it's been 130 years since, in the beginning of this book, since Israel fell. So they should be out of the 70-year captivity, should be Persia we're talking about now. So Iran, very interesting. The land which bears rule now will be laid waste. Now, that could be just simply what happened later, because the Persians were taken over by the Greeks. The Greeks were taken over by the Romans. And the Roman Empire, in its fragmented form, is what we're still dealing with today. As soon as it completely falls, we'll have 10 nations. So we're looking at that. It says, if the Most High grants you life, you will see that after the third day, and some of these manuscripts say third trumpet, but remember, this is written way before the book of Revelation, so it can't be talking about the trumpets in Revelation. That's a common mistake a lot of people think when the when the scriptures talk about the last trump, that it's got to be the seventh trumpet in the book of Revelation. But the book of Revelation is the last book written in the New Testament. So none of the others can be quoting it. They got to be referring to something else. And that's not too hard to figure out, but it's just one of those things we got to remember to put together. So after the third day, the sun will suddenly shine again at night and the moon in the day. Now we can take that and look at this whole concept of a dark moon and a dark, the sun going dark. We know that's in the middle of the tribulation period somewhere, or some people say at the beginning, but it's during the tribulation period. So I thought it was interesting. It's after the third day. Now in the Minor Prophets, which no matter how you look at this was written before this, we have Joel talking about the day of the Lord as a day of gloominess and darkness and thick darkness. The moon doesn't give her light, or is blood red, things like that. But there's one place in, I believe it's Hosea, that talks about in the third day he will raise us up. And so it's an interesting concept. I'm not sure exactly what third day means, but I'm assuming it's connected with that particular one. So they're meaning the same thing. And this is what helps us with this. I may not know what third day is in Hosea, and I may not know it here, but putting the two together, I might begin to figure it out. And that's why it's important to pull these things together. So that happens sometime after that. So Israel's supposed to come back, and they did before the end of the third day, or the 3,000 years, depending on how you look at that. It says this: blood will drip from wood, and the stone will utter its voice. The nations will be troubled, and the air will be changed. So this could be in various different forms. When I look at this, of course, it's just because I'm a Christian, the blood dripping from wood, to me seems like the crucifixion. So several things will happen. And of course, during the crucifixion, there was some sort of a darkness that covered the planet. So we could be talking about that too. But blood dripping from wood. And if not, we're talking about some sort of execution stakes, some sort of execution, persecution, or whatever, or crucifixion. And the stone will utter its voice. Don't know what that means, but also remember when Jesus said, the Pharisees asked him to make his disciples be quiet, stop calling him what he was, and referring to the prophecies. And he says, if they were to be quiet, I tell you the truth, the stones would cry out. And I think that's an idiom for something specific. I'm not sure what, but in either case, the stone will utter its voice is interesting in comparison to what Jesus said. And the nations will be troubled, and the air will be changed. That's one of those things that, again, it could be several different things, but it seems to me to indicate some sort of different atmospheric problem. There is a whole bunch, and we'll see it in some of these too. There are a series of prophecies that don't deal with earthquakes or wars or whatever, but last days Nephilim technology, which has to do with altering the genetics on one side, but also maybe not even that, but something wrong with the food system, with the air system, and it causes unnatural disease. We have those kind of prophecies all the way through this manuscript and several others, actually. On our network, we have a group called Hagi, and I think most of that is in there. Not enough for us to really identify anything in particular, but some things. Let's see here. The one whom many do not set their hopes on, that's the Antichrist, will rule, and the birds will migrate. So that's pretty interesting. This part here is interesting to me. The Sea of Sodom, that would be the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea will produce many fish and make noise in the night, which none have heard before, but all will hear it. So there have been a receding of water in the Dead Sea, and there are certain pockets of it now where there are some life forms, some sort of fish that can exist in extremely salty water. But it seems like it's beginning to heal itself. And so the fact that this is one of the prophecies that talk about the Dead Sea all of a sudden having life in it. Well, it's definitely nowhere near finished, but the process has begun, apparently, because I don't think anybody has ever said that's happened in the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. Confusion will abound in many places, and fire will often rain down, and the desert beasts will migrate from their places. Now, let's stop there at this point here. Confusion will abound. Many times in the Old Testament, we have where someone is going to attack Israel, and the Lord sends them confusion, and they attack the other side of their group, thinking, like say an army divides in two divisions. Somehow they get confused and think the other division is actually Israel, and they obliterate themselves. And that has happened multiple times in the Old Testament. It's prophesied to happen with the Gog-Magog invasion, among several others. I think of right now, I know that the current government of Syria, being that's ISIS-linked, which again, there's an interesting prophecy about that very specifically in this particular manuscript we'll get to in a few weeks. But anyway, it's interesting. They wouldn't like Israel. Hezbollah wouldn't like Israel. You'd think they'd team up together to try and annihilate Israel. Well, they would like to, and they might. Right now, they're busy fighting each other. Why? And you'd think like, well, one kind of Sunni Muslim and a Shia Muslim, they're at least Muslim. They're closer together than they are to the secular states or to Israel or to some other religious state. But they still need to fight each other. It's that form of apostasy. Not the denominational idea, but the apostasy that forms where you have to kill off the opposite person, that extreme apostasy. So confusion will abound in many places. There'll be many places like this. Everybody, if they got together, could wipe us out easy, but they never do get together. They're too busy killing each other. And that's one thing that God does consistently throughout the Old Testament. And often fire will rain down. Well, today fire rains down in the form of missiles and drones. Actually, this last year or so, the drone stuff has gotten very interesting. And now laser-guided missiles and now anti-missile laser systems. It's getting very Star Wars-like. It's really interesting to see. The beasts of the desert will migrate from their places. That's when everything gets all confused. And animals that normally don't attack you will migrate because they're hungry and will attack. We see that in Joel, the animals attack. Some of the people have noticed in the desert animals or the desert beasts, are we actually talking about like pumas, wild cats, wild dogs, beasts like that? Or are we talking about Nephilim creatures that normally are out there somewhere and no one sees them? Something happens to make them migrate or come forth. Possibly. Because the next part of this is interesting. Menstruous women will bring forth monsters. Now, this is it's interesting. We see this phrase. It's not translated exactly the same way, but it is translated. This phrase actually appears in Luke, which we won't look at tonight, but it's really similar. The basic idea is a woman usually has a menstrual cycle, and when she gets pregnant, the menstrual cycle normally stops. Now, if it continues, that could be very dangerous to her and the baby. It's not normal. And so somehow these women they're pregnant with something, but they still continue to have menstrual cycles. I've heard of things like that today. It used to be a completely unheard of thing. So lots of things could cause that. Again, their bodies aren't doing what's right. That could be as simple as the fact their bodies aren't fortified with the proper vitamins and minerals that they should be having because our food system's messed up. And I really am, after studying the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Hagi herbal medicine, and the prophecies and stuff, I am really much looking forward to the possibility, now that we have the second Trump administration with RFK heading up the Food and Drug Administration, the health organization, to at the very least stop the artificial chemicals. And we all agree on this, except for the people that make a lot of money on it. Nothing to do with the stuff you're not supposed to talk about online, medical procedures or anything, but just the fact that you spray something on the crops to make the bugs not eat them. That's good. I don't want bugs eating my food, but at the same time, the reason they don't eat it is because they sense something wrong with it. And that's not good for us either. All the extra sugar and all the extra things that they put in the food, that can, let me put it this way, it does cause problems for some people. And maybe it doesn't cause any problem for other people. But either way, we really do need to get back to a healthier diet. My family has tried the best we can getting what we assume to be proper food, the non-GMO, who knows if it is, but labeled as such. And we're trying to eat as healthy as possible. And then mainly my thought is the herbal medicine supplements that the Essenes use, trying to pull those together. And we have actually had a good amount of success. Nowhere near what we're supposed to. So that means there's something amiss. I'm missing formulas, or the food supply is just really bad. So who knows? I've got friends in Canada that say that's one nice thing about being up there. Their food's good. Down here, it's just weird, So anyway, so they bring forth monsters would be deformed at the very least, a human being that's deformed. If we're talking about Nephilim type things again, which this very well could be, because if you link it with Luke in the Gospels and a couple of other passages, later on this year, I want to go back and do kind of a Nephilim 2.0 study. We did a pre-flood version of it. We want to look at some of the basics from that and go forward in some of the post-flood Nephilim stuff and look at some of the prophecies. Right now, we're just focused on prophecies per se, but that would be Nephilim, and they overlap in some places. So that's one thing. So salt water will be found in fresh water, and friends will suddenly wage war on their friends. So this is talking about, and this very well could be related, especially if you've got women that aren't reproducing properly and because of something are having deformed kids, Nephilim experiments or what. This doesn't necessarily mean every single woman will be like this. We could be talking about a certain subgroup, somebody doing experiments in a certain country, or who knows. But you couple that with friends suddenly waging war on their friends. Now, the government cracking down on you, telling you if you do certain things you're not supposed to, you're going to get in trouble, you're going to get fired, like we see in China. That's one thing. That's political pressure to turn your family in for persecution. And that's always been. And that might be what we're talking about here. But the other thing is, J.D. Farag, most of you know him, at the Calvary Chapel guy. He has been doing some studies showing that certain, again, I want to be careful not to say the bad words that are politically incorrect. Leave that to RFK. But sometimes certain things are causing not just like myocarditis or brain lesions or, breathing problems, the micro blood clots, things like that. Those are fairly easy to fix, except if you get scar tissue on them, That still might be easy to fix for lungs and heart, but in the brain, sometimes it causes a change in personality. And that's what was kind of scary. He was talking about that a month or two back. So that would be interesting. If you start eating the wrong kind of food, the wrong kind of medicine, the Nephilim type stuff, and suddenly your personality changes. And it could also be demonic possession that we're talking about. If you and I are Christians, part of our families are non-Christians, but they tolerate us, and now they have a demonic influence, or any combination of those things can cause this. But I think it's interesting how we have the menstruous women bringing forth what's possible Nephilim creations, and then changes in personality to people that are here. And in the midst of it is salt water found with fresh water, which is normally not the case. Normally, things grow in fresh water that don't grow in salt, and vice versa. So there's sea fish and sea kelp and freshwater plants and freshwater fish. And if you mix those together, you'll probably get everything dead. It's not that it's going to adapt very well, but it makes it seem like maybe there's some sort of, that would be a genetic change. So just saying. Interesting things here. Again, this won't tell us a whole lot, but I think when we couple this with the other Nephilim prophecies, it might make a little more sense. And especially in time. We may still not understand it right now, but in the next decade, I think it'll be pretty clear. It says, then wisdom will hide itself, and understanding will withdraw in its secret chamber. So in other words, people that understand will start to pull back. So what would happen if there is some Nephilim stuff going on, some poisoned food stuff, and if this was going on now, and you stood up on the internet and said, hey, we need to be careful of not eating these things, or you need to grow your own food, or eat this kind but not that kind, and that's your opinion, so that's fine. We have freedom of speech. We're supposed to have freedom of speech. If that was going on and you stood up to talk against it, what would happen? You would probably endanger yourself and your family. I'm thinking of like Nazi Germany. You don't come against the Nazis. You just say, okay, yeah, yay, and then you slowly back out the door. So this is kind of seems to be what we're talking about here. So then unrighteousness and self-indulgence will multiply on the earth. Well, I can see that going on now, but in context, it's related to these things. So what we're seeing now might be the beginning of it, but it's going to go much further that way. So I think now one of the things we need to understand is to teach righteousness to our church and our kids, and be careful of self-indulgence. It's fine to do fun things, but understand, to use biblical terms, in a time of light, when there's no persecution, everything's fine, nothing matters. You want to go bowling, you want to go do whatever, there's nothing wrong with it, go do it. But in a time of persecution, those might be dangerous, not because it's bowling, but because you're out in public or something. So it's the type of thing that we need to watch, the unrighteousness and the self-indulgence, and we need to devote ourselves to study and to prayer, basically. And as that time comes, and I'm personally of the opinion that we had a preview of this over the last decade or so. Right now, we're entering a specific time of reprieve. And we'll talk about these later. It's a totally different scroll, but there's a manuscript that talks about in the last generation. The last generation begins this March, so it's about a month away. We actually start, I'm sorry, not the last generation, but the Jubilee year for this cycle. Then in March of 2026 begins the last Jubilee of this age, according to their calendar. And that would be also called the last generation. And it seems to fit very well with what's going on. So the first 7-year period, Shemitah, in the last generation, it seems to be a really good time. And I don't mean by fun, but I mean like possible worldwide revival. We fix a lot of things. I think fixing the food supply would go a long, over here anyway, would go a long way to that. So there's a lot of interesting things. Now, the last Jubilee, or the last Shemitah of that cycle, is going to be really bad. So anyway, it looks like, and when you look of Trump being in office, completely supporting Israel, Israel's possibility of getting rid of Gaza and Hezbollah, and the prophecies of Zephaniah and Obadiah finally coming to pass, they do sometime. And if it's not this time around, 5 or 10 years from now, they'll do the whole thing all over again. They've already had like, what, 2 or 3 Lebanese wars, all the way up to the Litani River, exactly as prophesied in Obadiah. And then they give it back, which means they have to do it again. So we don't know if this time is the main one, but eventually it happens. And we know exactly what does happen. So it's really interesting to see that. So we got to be careful. So as we do this, it's wise for us to get in groups of local churches where we can have fellowship one to the other. We can be held accountable one to the other. We can be helped with the herbal medicine and fresh food and things like that. When in our Tuesday night study, we have 2 ladies that do range-free eggs, and it's amazing looking at the eggs, how they cook, what they look like, the taste, and then just knowing, according to what we're told, the extreme amount of vitamins and minerals just in one egg compared to what you get at the store. So interesting. It might be really important if we have some sort of a major war or a major famine or some sort of pestilence or disease, and some government agency trying to tell you what you can and cannot do and giving you the wrong misinformation, so to speak, that might come in really handy. So these are the things that, and again, it looks like we're getting a reprieve from this, but we know the direction we're heading toward: an Antichrist system, a 7-year tribulation period, and such. Okay, so one nation will ask another, have any righteous men traveled through you? And they will answer, no. At the same time, men will hope but not obtain, will labor and not prosper. I have been allowed to tell you these signs, but if you pray, cry, and fast again for 7 days, you will hear greater things than these. And of course, he does. So pulling it all together, this plus other passages in the scroll, we have the end time signs. We have an apostasy that happens, and I don't think it's the apostasy, that certain event, but it's a generalized, maybe slowly over time or because of persecutions, a apostasy develops. So I think we're in that stage now. But an apostasy occurs, then there's a rapture, and then Iran or Persia, Iran will be laid waste. That goes along with Enoch chapter, is it 56? 50 something. And Jeremiah 49, the things that we're looking at now. I just heard today, I mean, it's poised to really be bad for everybody. And I just heard today Iran is thinking of, or is planning on, attacking Israel again when they choose to. Now, that could just be them saving face, but you've got to be insane to do something like that. Anyway, we'll find out what happens. I guess here you go. We know what happens. The sun will be shining at night and the moon in the day. Blood will be dripping from wood. That could be beheadings also. Stones will cry out. Not sure what that is. There will be terror among the nations. The air was changed somehow. Unrighteousness and lack of self-control flourish. There's the coming of the Antichrist. Fire raining down. Desert beasts attack. Confusion occurs. Women giving birth to monsters, possibly Nephilim, while they're still in their menstrual cycle. So that would be a clue. just extra information. When you begin to see things, you can say, well, that group is not doing it, but this group is the full thing, be able to track it down. And then the Dead Sea teeming with fish. That's interesting. Now, these are signs, and I've labeled them 1 to 15, but that doesn't mean one has to happen, and then when it's finally all over, then number 2. And only after number 2 would we have number 3. Sometimes you'll have scriptures say this, then that, and it means exactly that. But this is a list of signs. So for instance, we're seeing the very beginning of 15 already happening. The confusion has been around for a long time. The apostasy's been around for a long time. The error changed. I don't know, depending on what that is, it may or may not have happened. If it's connected with something wrong in the air, causing the food system and poisons to get, could be a bunch of stuff. I have some friends would say that's global warming. Something. I don't know if there really is a global warming, but there's something like that. Or I don't know if this is talking about that, I should say. Unrighteousness and lack of self-control, that's been going on forever in general, But so these are interesting things. Desert beasts attack. At the very least, animals will get hungry because of famine and will begin attacking humans that they normally wouldn't, just because they're starving to death. So you're going to be attacked all over from just normal animals. And in either way, I'm sure that will happen, because that always happens when animals get hungry. So that's a done deal. But is this talking about that and that only, or is it other things too? So let's go ahead and finish this. It says, I awoke, and with great fear went through my body, and my mind was troubled, so that it fainted. An angel who came and spoke with me took a hold of me, strengthened me, and set me on my feet. In the second night, Salathiel, one of the captives of my people, came to me and said, where have you been, and why is your countenance so sad? Do you not know that you are entrusted with Israel in this place of captivity? So he's supposed to be a governor or a priest and helping them adapt, and he had disappeared for a while. It says, stand up then, eat bread, do not hand us over to those destructive wolves. And I said to him, leave me alone for 7 days. When you come back, I will explain these matters to you. And when he heard this, he left. So this is your priest or your pastor saying, something really special is going on. I don't have time to talk about it. I know I'm supposed to be preaching Sunday. I am not going to be there. I will be back in 7 days and I will explain it. You're going to have to trust me. And of course, okay. So let's see here. We want to go, let's read this and then we'll stop. I fasted for 7 days, mourning and weeping, as Uriel, the angel, had commanded me. After 7 days, the thoughts of my heart were again troubling me greatly, and my soul received the spirit of understanding. I began to speak with the Most High again. I said, O Lord, from all the trees in the woods of the earth, you have chosen only one vine. Now again, through the Dead Sea Scrolls, the trees always mean nations. The vine is Israel. From all the lands of the whole world, you have chosen one place. And from all of the flowers of the world, you have chosen one flower. From all the depths of the sea, you have filled one stream. And from all the cities that have been built, you have sanctified Zion only for yourself. So Israel, Jerusalem, Zion, the Israelites, that nation. From all the birds that you have created, you have named yourself one dove. From all the cattle that have been created, you have selected one sheep. From the multitude of nations, you have chosen one people. And unto this people whom you love, you gave the law, which was approved among all. Now, O Lord, Why have you delivered up the one people unto many, and added others to the one nation bearing rule? Why have you scattered your only people among so many? This to me is interesting. I mean, this is going to be what he's talking about in general, but and it could simply be that the 70-year captivity is over and groups of people have just went everywhere. But it almost sounds like we're switching, like the prophets do a lot, from Babylon to them being in all countries. That would be the Roman expulsion, which ends in 1948. Those who resist your commandments and not believed in your covenant have trodden them underfoot. If you hated your people so much, you should have punished them with your own hands. Now you're getting to a place where you need you don't be telling God what he should be doing. Okay, and then we'll read this and stop here. So same kind of a question again. Why aren't you fixing this? The answer, I'm sure, is going to be, I have a plan. After I'd spoke these words, the angel who came to me the night before was sent to me. And he said, listen to me and I will inform you. Accept what I say and I will tell you more. If you're not going to get off of this thing and understand, I can't bother to tell you other things. And I answered and said, speak on, my Lord. And he said to me, are you upset for Israel's sake? Which is what it sounds like. Do you love them more than God who made them? In other words, he's just thinking backwards. If his main problem or concern is Israel, then yeah, you should be acting like this and speaking like this, and you should be upset. Whereas if he was to say, then he really doesn't care about Israel. But the question is, who should you be more concerned with? Israel or God? I see this a lot of times in our churches. We'll let people in that we probably shouldn't because we want them to be saved. But we're also supposed to protect our kids in our churches and make sure there's no dissension in the churches so that people can get saved. And so the question is, it's a hard decision. Do I let this person stay who's causing problems? Do I talk to him? If I talk to him, he's liable to get mad and leave, and then maybe he never will get saved and it's my fault. Those are legitimate questions. But what are you there to do? To serve the people or to serve God? You're there to serve God. Okay, then it's easy. What did he say to do? Those kind of people you don't let in the door. Those kind of people you bend over backwards to help. Everybody else together learns how to do all of that. Very, very important. So we got to take care of our churches. And everybody can always repent, but I'm talking about con artists coming to the church. Well, how do you know for sure? Doesn't matter. Keep them out until you know for sure. Let them prove themselves. So this is what he's talking about. You love Israel? Do you love the people more than God? You're not here to do this. You're not here to build the church. You're here to serve God. If you do it correctly, the church would probably God will build the church. And I said, no, my Lord, I have spoken out of grief because my reins pain me every hour. I seek to comprehend the way of the Most High and search out part of his judgment. Maybe so, because if you can really understand, then maybe you can help the situation. But just don't be so concerned with a certain person as you should be concerned with God. God comes first. And he said to me, you cannot. And I said, why, my Lord? I want to understand why God's doing it, what his thoughts are, his reasons. You can't. You're a human being. That's not your place. It's not possible. Why was I born then? Why did I not die in my mother's womb? So I would not see Jacob's travail and this toil of the seed of Israel. And then he's going to go back and talk about because God has a plan, everything in its order. And here's another prophecy tip in the next section. So he keeps falling back into the same place. This is not right. And I need to understand, I need to fix it. And then say, no, no, God has a plan. Okay, well, it's not right. So I need to figure out what his plan is so I can help him fix it, because this is not right. He's still fixated on Israel. And I can understand why. If I was there, I'd probably be worse than he is. Not saying he's a bad guy, but he's got to get his focus off of Israel and on to God. This will fix itself, or God can do it. God can do anything like that. So we need to not try to force God to do something, even in a good way like this. So we'll stop there at this point, and we'll go back through, and again, we're going to talk about everything being in its order, and then a clue on prophecy about Zion's age. And then to understand that completely, we got to understand how Abraham is the key to dividing the ages. So with the riddle of time, the time left until the Messianic kingdom, coupled with Zion's age and Abraham being the key to the time table, the calendar system, those three go together to really begin to solidify prophecies. And then there's, he asked to understand more prophecy. And then here's another one, an aging prophecy, goes along with the air being changed and the women giving birth to strange or deformed people or whatever it is that they're doing. In other words, we're not sure, but there's an aging prophecy that goes with the herbal medicine, Nephilim technology prophecy. And then there's a very specific prophecy about the rapture and the return. And in this prophecy, you will see that it's a very clearly a pre-trib rapture. It is a group of people, not two, like the two witnesses or whatever. And when they return, the kingdom starts. So they return at the second coming. They go away way before that. So it's really interesting. And then the final thing on that whole section is you're supposed to concentrate on prophecy, not the past. We look at history and see patterns like this so that, hopefully we read this and think, dude, I understand you're grieving, but he's told you nicely about 15 times. The answer's there, not here. Why are you still focused on this? And it's a really good lesson for us. Study prophecy, focus on prophecy. God has a plan, and we definitely want to be in that plan. So we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight. We'll come back and look at that. And I think we have some comments in the chat room, so we'll go look at those. Matthew became a member level archangel. Thank you very much. We really appreciate the people that are coming on board with us, helping to support us. We will be doing more members only live stuff. New books are always coming out, so we'll get there. And this year we want to again do some more Nephilim studies, some more prophecy studies, especially in light of what's going on with Russia and Europe and the reshaping of the Middle East. Finally getting into position, Obadiah, Zephaniah, and the others have prophesied, and these. So anyway, thank you very much. Glad you're on board with us. So question, have you heard of scrolls discovered in the Judean wilderness about 900 AD? Yes. 1 Timothy 1:47, including the New Testament. Okay, I hadn't heard that. Copies of the New Testament. There are some rumors that there are probably most of the New Testament that are in Hebrew. That would be copies, but they're probably early or late first century, early second century. And that's one of the things I've been working on recently. We have Jude, James, Revelation, Matthew, Mark, and I believe John. But there are rumors of Matthew through like 2 Corinthians or something. And then part of the major and minor, the general epistles. So not everything, but there are rumors that there are Hebrew versions of this. And it doesn't matter which one's earliest or which one's the original. The point being, if I take the King James Bible and you could do this too, you could just make the shouts shall and the wilts will, and take out all the archaic language, make all the these and thys you and yours, or whatever you want to do with it, and then it'll read much better. So you could do that. And what someone has done back in those days, like we all do, is make a translation, a better translation of that language or from that language into Greek, Hebrew, Latin, whatever. And if you find a translation that's done in the 1st or 2nd century, which is hard to do, those are going to be around the places where we have people that would say, I remember my grandfather talking about when he would have lunch with John and they talked about this and he told me it's this way. So you'd have eyewitnesses that could correct these things. And so when you have 5 or 6 different translations in different languages real early, I would think those would be more valuable than anything else we would have today. So when you have stuff like that, there's things we definitely want to look into. So as far as the 900 AD stuff, there is a prophecy in the book of Enoch using the timelines that he used. Around 900, there was supposed to be a revival in certain knowledge because of certain scrolls. And we do know of a group that went to the Judean hills and found certain things and then kind of disappeared with them. So I'm not sure what happens with that story. Along the same lines, the testaments of the 12 patriarchs, the story is someone found them in the caves of the Judean hills, brought it to either the Armenian or the Syrian groups. Anyway, 1 or 2 of the people, and the Eastern Orthodox churches, they translated into Greek and put it in their canon because they believed in it. And then the originals are gone. And so that made it a really nice story that nobody believed until the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And we have parts or fragments of half of those in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So apparently it's true, the whole thing. And the fragments we have are pretty much word perfect. So anyway, so there's a lot of things going on like that are really interesting. Then Cave 7, about 14 or 1500, with the Scroll of Moshe, 200 Psalms, 12 Testaments of the Patriarchs, etc. Yeah, Cave 7 didn't have hardly anything in it, if I remember correctly. Just a couple of pieces of pottery, I believe. Anyway, total number of Dead Sea Scrolls from all the caves, all 12 caves, totals about 900 and some, a little less than 1,000 scrolls. There is a scroll of the words of Moses. There are extra psalms. We have 150 in our Protestant canon. Eastern Orthodox have 151. The scrolls have those same 151 plus another 9. So there's 160 total out of what we have. We're told that there's quite a bit more. There are the Psalms of David, the Songs of David for each one of the Sabbaths. There should be 52 of those, and then quite a bit more. So really interesting to study. When we will be studying a lot of that stuff in the near future. So hopefully that answers your question. Lastly, when did Cave 7 collapse? I don't know anything about it, that particular one, or about it collapsing. Question: can you tell me if one person in your household is a born-again believer, but the rest follow worldly things, can the family still be saved even if one follows Christ? Yeah, it's up to the individuals. Christ is not going to force anybody to get saved. You would be a fantastic witness in time just by being a consistent Christian. Everybody knows that you're going to get upset, you're going to yell, you're not perfect. Everybody's like that. But in time, they're going to see that you are closer to perfect and more dedicated to the scriptures, even though they think it's wrong. You got to admire a person like that. And then they see you having less trouble. And if you talk prophecy to them and they begin to see the prophecies, they will start giving everything a second thought. So you need to be there for them for that. But no, one person, it does not guarantee the entire family or household is saved. Now, there is a scripture that some people base that on in the book of Acts. Talks about they were saved and the household. And I think that's very clearly the same thing. If someone comes here and heals a grandmother who's like deathly terminal and now she's perfectly fine, everybody knows that. They want to know what happened. Well, it's about this Jesus guy. Well, who is he and what did he do? And then you tell them the story. Most of the time, I would assume the entire family would get saved. And so that's the kind of the situation we're talking about in Acts. But yeah, each one has to make a decision for the Lord. Super chat, $5. Thank you very much. Heard that Char Broderson stated that the nation of Israel is not a supernatural prophetic fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Sad. He's the coaster, or is he rather, pastor of Costa Mesa. Please comment. I don't know. I mean, I didn't really listen to anything. I'd heard that. The one thing I can say is that that's not Calvary Chapel teaching. And if you believe, like I do, the Dead Sea Scrolls, I'm not telling you have to believe it because it's Calvary Chapel doctrine. What I would be saying is you have to believe it because the scriptures are consistent. The church fathers teach you how to interpret it, and the Dead Sea Scrolls totally agree and give you more prophecy. And some of those prophecies I've seen in my lifetime. So you pull all that together, I know because of that. Now, it just so happens that Calvary Chapel fits the scroll prophecies the way I see them better than anybody else. That's why I became a Calvary Chapel guy, because that seems to be one of the best places to hang out. I'm sure there's a lot of others that study and are serious too. But yeah, this was Broderson's son that took over. If he said such a thing, he's walking in apostasy. That's all I got to say about it. Again, I didn't hear him say that, but anybody that says anything like that is denying scripture. And the one thing, you can go back on our and I'm sure he won't because he's got his mind set up if he said that, but you can go back on our prophecy studies and look at the timeline prophecies. It's not just that Israel was supposed to come back sometime, somewhere, and do something. They were supposed to come back to their ancient homeland, reconstitute the nation, and the prophecy said it would happen in 1948. Now, it's on a different calendar system, but it's very easy to convert to Gregorian. So just like Jesus was supposed to come and die for our sins, according to Daniel 9 and according to 11Q13, the Dead Sea Scrolls, that was supposed to occur in 32 AD, give or take a year, and it did. Israel is supposed to come back and establish their nation in that place at that time with the Hebrew language, everything, and that was supposed to be in 1948, and they did. And this is what's so incredible about it. People try to say that those Jews over there are not really Jews. I can't prove ethnically that they are or not. I hear a lot of people talking about genetics, and I don't know if that's really legitimate or not. But what I do know is that the true Jews are supposed to go to their land and establish a nation in 1948. So did somebody claiming to be Jewish do that? Yes. Then those people must be Jews. Otherwise, the prophecy is wrong. It's just real simple. And I've talked to several friends that don't believe in prophecy, some Calvinistic friends that have said just flat out, it's got to be a coincidence. Because if it's not, our theology's wrong and we're not going there. Just like, well, that again is this whole apostate attitude. Not what you're believing, but the attitude. If the prophecies are specific, and I could see you believing one of two different ways until 1948, how do you get around that? Then what about the other prophecy that talks about in 1967, they're supposed to take back their Temple Mount, but for whatever reason, not build a temple. Go figure. But whatever, 1967 is when they took back the Temple Mount. What about the other Dead Sea Scroll prophecy about what happens in 2026? Finally, Gaza is finished. Or at least I think that's what it's talking about. But this all started 3 years before. Yeah, in 3. And it looks like it's about to be finished now. So apparently it's going to take another year or better to get everything completely finished. Anyway, but what about those things? What if the Gaza residents are completely gone and Gaza is taken over either by Israel, United States, whatever, sold to somebody, whatever? And the prophecies about the Hamas government structure of Gath of the Philistines in this particular age, which is very clear in Amos and in other places. What if that happens? It's a coincidence? I mean, how many more coincidences do we need before we know scriptures are true? And that's the whole point of prophecy. Now, there's been hundreds of years go by with no prophecies fulfilled. I get that. It's because it wasn't time. But apparently we're nearing the end of the age, which is what the calendar teaches us too. So yeah, it's interesting. I'll run across people like that. I don't know what to say other than prophecy. Now, if he was to listen to me and hear that much of it, he would either say it's a coincidence, you're making the numbers fit because whatever, or walk away, or he would study it for himself and decide if that's true, I'm wrong. So hopefully he will. But there's a lot of stuff like that going on. Just because you walk into, and I think very highly of Calvary chapels. I'm an elder in my Calvary chapel. We go to Calvary Chapel, Johnson County, which is in Olathe, Kansas. So you guys are welcome to come. Great pastor with a great heart. So if we had, just because you go into a Calvary chapel or any church doesn't mean that they're going to be teaching it correctly. So you've got to use discernment. You've got to look at these things yourself. And it's hard to pull it all together, but like me, the stuff that I just gave you, it's in the prophecy playlist on YouTube. Look at it. It's either true or it's not. So just look at it. Like I say to most of my Jewish friends, they're taught to stay away from Christianity. Just look at the scrolls. Just honestly, you can read Hebrew better than I can. Pick it up and read it. Just think about it. Decide for yourself. What seems logical to you? You're a Jew in Israel. That should not even be a thing unless God did a miracle. And the date's given. When did you get there? Before they were born, of course, but those are just things that we need. Those are just a handful of prophecies. There's a lot of prophecies that we're trying to dig out. So yeah, if he said something like that, or anybody saying anything like that, I would stay away from that church. Super chat, $20. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate that. Reading Deuteronomy 32 in the Septuagint. It reads the sons of God, angels, instead of the sons of Israel. It appears that God assigned angels over nations. Would that account for the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece? Yeah, I believe so too. And I know a lot of people, the Septuagint's got a lot of problems with the numbering system. The numbers are just different. They're just off. But most of the stories are correct. And so what I would do is, let me just show you real quick here. Okay, so here's our Bible study. This is our tonight thing. And under the studies, we've got Dead Sea Scroll studies. If you click on this, right here is the Dead Sea Scroll Old Testament. I put this together myself. It's a PDF. It's free. You can download it. But like you're talking about Deuteronomy 32, it might be in there a couple of different ways. But if we go to Deuteronomy and try to get down to 32 here. 30, whoa, I went way too far. Deuteronomy 32. Okay, here we go. And let's see here. Is it in here or is it somewhere else? Okay, yeah, here it is. Deuteronomy 8 and 9. Yeah. So here's what the Dead Sea Scrolls say. They agree with the Septuagint. When the Most High divided the nations to their inheritance, he separated the sons of Adam. He set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of God. And that really, that should not be children. That should be sons. It's always like that. So it's not the sons of Israel or the children of Israel, but it's the sons of God. So, and he set the bounds, and he mentions the 70. So apparently there's 70 sons of God that are Elohim that are over the nations. So yeah, it's the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint has angels rather than the sons of Israel or the children of Israel. So yeah, it definitely goes along with that kind of thing. Isn't it fascinating? Super chat, $50. Thank you very much. Thank you for the questions and the study. Well, you're welcome. Glad you're here. Question: are there any references to God as being the word of the Lord in the Old Testament? In other words, the word as divine, a divine person and not a verbal written communication. Yeah, I would say so in many places. For instance, a lot of the prophets, I'm thinking of Ezekiel for one, they will all say, the word of the Lord came to me saying, write this down and do this or whatever. Look at it very carefully. Somebody came to me and told me to write this down. So I wrote down what he said, and he said, blah, 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 and they write it down. Well, who is the person that said that? The word of the Lord. So yeah, there's actually, in my opinion, a lot of places where the word of the Lord is talking about a Christophany or a theophany, a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. And it seems to have happened quite often. That doesn't mean that every single time you see the word of the Lord that it means that, but it sure looks like it in a lot of places. Is there anything in the Dead Sea Scrolls about the red heifer ritual and the third temple? A little bit on the third temple, nothing specifically about the red heifer ritual. Remember, most of what we have is fragmented, so I'm sure they had information on it, but nothing directly. Talk is going on that Israel may do this year. Only one or only 2 or 3 of the 5 are still good. Yeah, the idea is to create a herd because you have to have it so many years old and not older than that. It has to be perfect, never had a cut, things like that. So the longer you wait, the more easily it is for them to be disqualified. But the idea is that if you have a herd that continually reproduce red heifers, you'll always have 3, 5, 10 of them at any given time. And that's really what they're after. So it's definitely coming. It's prophesied to happen. They're in the process of getting it ready, or it is ready now to happen sometime. So again, those are exciting things. There are prophecies from the Talmud and other places about when that ritual happens. If God accepts it, there are certain miracles that happen. And I am going to absolutely love to see when that actually takes place. I want to watch the high-res videos of the sacrifice because I want to see for myself. If I see those, that's going to be fantastic. Again, it's one of those things where you read about it ahead of time. It can't happen this way, but it always does because it's a miracle. And then you get to watch it. It's just absolutely fantastic. Gary Stearman from Prophecy Watchers has a theory that the 10 kings do not rule over 10 kingdoms, but rather they are 10 oligarchies and or technocrats that have power. What are your thoughts? It's a possibility. We want to look for 10 anything. And in this case, people have come up with the theories that powers in different places, kind of like in Psalms 83. For instance, it doesn't say that the problem is Egypt and Lebanon and Syria. It's the Hagarenes, the Gebal, the they're given different names. And those were tribal groups in those areas. So it kind of gives you the idea that it's not the nation of Egypt that's the problem. It's some terrorist group in Egypt, and it's not Lebanon and it's not Syria. It's some terrorist group in there, that particular war. And what's interesting, though, if you look at that, there are 10 of them. So that makes you go, ooh, another 10. I wonder if that could, fit. But there's other prophecies too, and I don't think that fits directly. It does seem to be talking, in my opinion, of 10 specific nations. So oligarchs in different places, if there's 10 of them that are in 10 separate nations, then it still would kind of sort of be those nations. And we're supposed to be looking for a set of 10. The idea is the old empire fragments, or what's left of the empire when it finally falls, fragments into 10. Hippolytus mentions that in Ezekiel, or Daniel chapter 11, rather, it mentions the Antichrist, who's the king of the north, most likely Syria, but Syria, Lebanon, somebody up there is the nation the Antichrist comes from. And he comes to attack Egypt. And Egypt is Sudan and Libya come to the defense of Egypt, and they're all wiped out by the Antichrist. Well, the prophecy talks about 3 of the 10 nations being destroyed by the Antichrist. So Hippolytus, and he doesn't say he got it directly from the apostles or where he got his information from, but he just tells us in his opinion, according to Daniel 11, the 3 nations that the Antichrist destroys are Egypt, Sudan, and Libya. Now, Sudan is pretty small, and maybe we're off on those. Maybe Libya includes a greater territory, and maybe Sudan is Ethiopia or the whole area or something. But either way, it seems like we're talking about specific nations rather than that. But it's possible they go together in some way. So what I'm telling everybody is we're supposed to look for 10 somethings. Like people were asking about the G10, for instance. Well, those are 10 specific nations. So if the 10 come together to do something, that'll be interesting. We just have to pull all the scriptures together. And the way I'm looking at it, I'm thinking it's more Middle Eastern nations. Doesn't mean it couldn't be partially Rome. Matter of fact, the picture that Daniel gives is the Roman Empire with the 2 legs, which is obviously Eastern and Western Rome. And there's 5 toes on each foot. So we might be looking at 5 Middle Eastern nations and 5 European nations, something along those lines. But either way, we're looking for 10 nations of something or 10 groups of something. And that's until it actually happens, that's what we're guessing on. Love Gary, by the way. He's got some excellent ideas. Most prophecy teachers will say that we are seeing the apostasy now, so why wouldn't we see the perdition, son of perdition, before the rapture, referring to 2 Thessalonians? It depends on what the apostasy is. There's been an apostasy and lots of apostasies for quite a while. In that particular place, it seems like we're talking about the apostasy. And it's been speculated that that could just be meaning rapture, the catching away. It could very easily be the rapture, catching away, causing everyone that's left to be really hardcore in their apostasy, causing it, because it sounds like it's an event, the apostasy. So I don't see that. Most of those, when you look at those things as a sign, the apostasy happens first, and then you see the son of perdition. Another way of looking at it could be that the apostasy are the 10 kingdoms that come out of Rome. Maybe they come out and that's what causes the collapse, rather than the collapse causing the 10 nations. So, but there's an event, though. There's a specific thing. So when you say there's been a degrading apostasy for the last 300 years and it continues to get worse, that obviously has something to do with it. But we're looking for a specific event, I would think. Good question, though. I've always heard the term rapture resurrection Shouldn't we call it a resurrection rapture since the dead in Christ rise first? Yeah, it's a good point. I think most of us are focused on the rapture, hoping that we don't die. I think that's probably why we do it. But yeah, either one, I guess technically you would be correct. It'd be a resurrection rapture. It's a good point. Question concerning the vision of the beasts. If the 10 horns represent kings, leaders, or powers, what do the crowns on the horns mean? In my opinion, it's the 10 horns are 10 nations. So usually when it says king, or it can be king or kingdom, because in reality you have to have a king to have a kingdom, and you have to have a kingdom, otherwise the king is powerless. So it's really all the same thing. So what we're talking about is there's a nation, or there's the sixth head is the Roman Empire, and it fizzles and dies. And then from it somehow is another empire, but this empire is made up of 10 kingdoms or 10 nations. So the horns would represent the nations or the kingdoms, preferably with a king or president or something heading them. So when they have in one part of the prophecy, the 10 horns have 10 crowns. So that means that they are 10 kingdoms with a government, dictator, a king, a president, a something ruling it. So then the Antichrist comes against them and destroys 3 of the 10 nations. So the nations are still there. He just takes them over. So in the next part of the vision, you see the head having 10 horns still, those nations, but there's only 7 crowns. So 3 of those crowns have been removed. So it's telling us that in this one vision, it's before the Antichrist attacks the 3 of the 10 nations. And in the other vision, it's whatever else is going on is happening after. So in that second half of the tribulation period. So I think that's the key to the whole thing. There's a lot of confusion on the horns, the heads, and the crowns, and how those go together. And it's cryptic enough, I'm still not absolutely sure I'm correct, but from what I was taught in seminary plus the church fathers, they give a good understanding of most of that. But there's still a lot of questions. But this is a really good question. Wouldn't there be no faith right after the great taking and the rapture? Yeah. What leads you to put the falling away here rather than the rapture? Oh, in 2 Thessalonians? I believe it could very easily be the same. When all of the rapture occurs, all the believers are gone. So for that split second, there are no believers on planet Earth. But there are a lot of people that have a heart that are open. They've never made a decision. They've heard about things, but just kind of put it off. Now they actually see the things begin to take place. And that would make a believer out of you fairly quick. And so in the tribulation, or I mean, in the book of Revelation, we have the great multitude of which no man can number. It's like a huge amount of people that become saved. Some of them make it through, a vast majority of them die. But still, there are some people like that. As far as putting the two together, the only reason I say that they could go together is because if we're talking about not a slippery slope, slow 300-year apostasy starting with a little and ending with a lot, but a specific event like boom, the government structure will be headed by people from all walks of life. When the rapture happens, all the governments are instantly filled with only non-believers. And then there's the satanic, the demonic forces and everything starting to take place. So they will start persecuting others. So that would be an instant apostasy of all the nations. So that could be what's actually causing it. Don't know if that's the way that it happens. I'm just saying it could be. We just know that there's going to be a rapture. That's going to cause something like I described for sure. Whether that's the apostasy we're talking about, don't know for sure. Because we have if you look in 1 Thessalonians, we're talking about an apostasy, then the man of sin revealed, And then it says later on, God sends those that worship the beast a delusion to believe the lie. So that's another specific lie, but it's different than the apostasy. So there are specific things going on. And if we can figure out more of them, we might be able to see where we're going a little clearer. Do you think the iniquity we referred to could be Islam? It kind of fits. The truth is definitely hidden from them. Yeah, it's a definite possibility. Um, or maybe not just Islam, but they have a form of godliness that is supposed to be Abrahamic faith, but at the same time, their form of godliness teaches that they must destroy the other forms. And the Jews did this back in the first century too. The Pharisees and Sadducees decided they had to execute people of other factions because they weren't them. And that's really what this apostasy is. It's not so much that you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, a denomination far apart or very close, but you get this attitude that you're supposed to be the judge, jury, and executioner, and that everyone else but you are bad. It's like a cult mentality. And so the cult decides it's us versus them, no matter what the case may be. And if it's really that serious, we should be trying to convert them and save them. And if it's not that serious, we shouldn't care or worry about it. So it's an interesting dichotomy. But Islam would definitely fit. There is a text called the Book of Gad the Seer, referenced in First Chronicles, and it's another amazing text. Gad was one of the keepers of the scrolls way back in the day. He wrote a book on prophecy, and in chapter 2 of that book, he refers to the end time harlot system, which makes you think of the Babylonian harlot system of Revelation. Seems to be that's what he's talking about because it occurs or is here right before the setup of the kingdom. And he seems to indicate that it forms out of two specific false religious systems that are anti-Semitic, which goes along with Zechariah's teaching of the two stork women with the woman in the ephah that goes to Shinar or Babylon. So the two that support the development of this false religious system, the daughters of Babylon, so to speak, it's described as one of them headquartered south of Israel somewhere, and the symbol for that group is a crescent moon. That sounds like Islam. And the other one is a group that's headquartered in Rome, Italy, the Khatim on the north side of the Mediterranean Sea. So that's obviously the Roman Empire, which, as far as a religion goes, Rome would be Roman Catholicism. It's the only thing that's there. So it's not so much, according to that prophecy, that it's Rome and or Islam, but it seems like factions of those two get together to form the Babylonian mystery religion, as prophesied. So today we would probably call that a type of Chrislam. And we see the beginnings of things like that. How quickly it will develop, what form it will take, don't know. But it's interesting that this is written by a prophet about 1000 BC, when Saudi Arabia was nothing, and even Rome was nothing. The pagan empire hadn't even really started out very much yet. I think at that time they were still in Alba. Rome, I'm not even sure Rome was created yet. But it's interesting to pull those together. So it's got to be a type of apostasy anyway, because of that same kind of deal. Any kind of Sharia law would be forcing the idea that we need to execute. According to Genesis 24, Eliezer was fetching a bride for Isaac. He spent 2 days with her. Tie in that to Hosea 6 after 2 days. What are your thoughts? There's a lot of things like that that actually could have a pattern. So yeah, he's getting a bride for Christ if he represents the Holy Spirit, working on it for 2 days, and on the third day he rose her up, so to speak. So yeah, it's interesting to see that kind of stuff. If there was just one or two, I'd say it's a coincidence, but there's a lot of stuff like that throughout the Old Testament. How could the Dead Sea make noise? I think from the life that's in it. Right now, there's nothing in it it's way too salty. I don't think there's any kind of life in it at all, if I remember correctly. But if that gets cleaned out to a point and we have some form of life, even saltwater life, it would begin to make noise. Now, if that's talking about some sort of really weird noise, maybe we're talking about Nephilim life that can exist in even, by Nephilim, I simply mean genetically altered life that could exist in a much denser salt than normal saltwater creatures. Don't know if that's a thing or not, but the main part of that, I think, is the idea that there's life in the Dead Sea, which hasn't been for thousands of years. But that's a good point. We need to look at that, the whole idea of the noise, because it does say noise like no one's heard before, and definitely nobody's heard noise there for thousands of years. But it kind of makes it sound like normal fish noise, and this is different. So Matthew 24:40, two will be taken. When do you think this happens? Does it happen during the tribulation? I think my personal opinion is we're talking about the rapture resurrection occurs, then there's a 7-year tribulation period, and this is when the Lord comes back with his saints and collects those that survive. There's not that many from all over the planet and takes them to Jerusalem. I think that's what we're kind of talking about. Some people look at that as the rapture, and other people look at it as the like a second Exodus type thing. And it depends on how you interpret a couple of the different things. When we get to studying Matthew 24 in the Hebrew, I think it'll make that kind of stuff a lot clearer. Still not absolutely sure myself, but the brotherhood, is it Sunni? Not sure which brotherhood we're talking about. Yeah, and I'm not sure who all's who. There's a large section of Alawites in Syria, and I think Syria, I don't remember. I know that Iran is Shia and Saudi Arabia is Sunni. Muslim Brotherhood you might be referring to down there. I'm not sure which one they are. Will you be talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls medicine? We do occasionally. We don't know that much about it. And I'm fine to talk about the prophecy part. And I hesitate to talk about, we figured this is this herb. So if you go buy this on Amazon, it'll help you do this, because I don't want to get shut down. But we do talk about that, and we definitely will on pieces of it. We also have our private network where we discuss herbal medicine too. When was the most recent scroll found, and what was it pertaining to? The last one was during the last Trump administration. And this just lets you know, it excites me a lot, because we had a you don't dig, it might be somebody else's property attitude, and they didn't dig. And then when Trump became president, before they know they had at least 4 years. And so there were 2 or 3 expeditions, and one of them found Cave 12. And Cave 12 officially has a bunch of blank paper, but they began to realize it was just extremely faded. So some of it was not blank. And there's supposed to be a special way of scanning it to try to get the letters off. And as far as I know, they have not done that yet. So there's something there. But before that was Cave 11, and I believe that was back in the late 1980s, I think. And Cave, there's probably some 30 or 40 different manuscripts from Cave 11. One of those is my favorite, 11Q13, that talks about the Messiah being God incarnate that comes to die for our sins. That event occurs in 32 AD, and that starts the Age of Grace, in which we can be reconciled to the Father, and it begins to talk a lot about prophecy. So to have something like that, I mean, you got a team of Catholics and Jews and Christians, Protestants by that I mean, and atheists, and people that are just secular, and people that don't care. They just want the money. So we're going to dig this up and very carefully make sure it's not destroyed. Nobody's going to switch it out. Nobody's going to tamper with it. So with all that going on, then you open it up and it talks about that. That's pretty wild. That's why we have a lot of Messianic Jews today. Became a member level Seraph. Thank you very much. Welcome aboard. We're going to have a lot of fun this summer doing different things. Another one became a member Archangel. Thank you very much. Welcome aboard. We'll have a lot of interesting studies. I'm really excited to see, like the last question. So since Trump says it's your land, dig it up. If you can make a book out of it or whatever and make some money, go for it. And I'm sure he would say the same thing. Now, right now they're engaged in a war, so that's not happening. But there are at least a handful of places, and if I know about them, everybody knows about them. So that they know there are things. There are like chests of things. Maybe it's a bunch of gold, but hopefully it's a bunch of scrolls. There are several places, but you don't dare, in a war situation, you don't mess with stuff. You don't want anything destroyed. You also don't want things stolen either. But George gifted 5 memberships. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'll have more interesting discussions in the text or in the chat room. Have you published a video on eating healthy, Essene medicine, or is that available on the network? There's a little bit of that on the network, and I think we have just a little bit on our regular YouTube channel. We'd have to check it and see if there's anything that's been frowned on by YouTube. It would be over at Rumble, because we try to do a copy over at Rumble. And it used to be set up to where I just do my YouTube stuff, and then 2 days later it's automatically, filtered over, but they stopped that for some reason. To my knowledge, I've only gotten in trouble with one video, and that was the one talking about the date of 1948, because I didn't say it properly, and it sounded like I was not anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, which is not what I was trying to be, but they considered it hate speech to say that Israel was supposed to be back in the land. So it was a long time ago. So yeah, there should be some on both, but definitely on our network. And there's not much. I mean, because I'm not trying to do become an herbal medicine doctor per se and give you guys prescriptions. I'm just trying to say, if there was an herbal medicine doctor back then and it's in the scrolls, then we need to pay attention to it like we would any other prophecy. So we're trying to do there. Yeah, hit the like button, definitely, and subscribe if you like this kind of stuff. The more we can grow, the more money we can make, and we can begin to reduce the number of ads. And I like money, but at the same time, if you're like me and I'm trying to find something and I have to sit through 2 videos just to get it started, and then in the middle of the video there's another, it's just like, and everybody's got to make their money, so it's just commercials like old style TV. But it would be nice to be able to do away with that kind of stuff. Does it use the word rapture? I'm not sure what the word rapture is, the Latin version. So in the Greek it says harpazo. In English it says catch up, like in King James rather. In the Latin version it's raptir, or some form of that. It means to be caught up. In the Hebrew Old Testament, I don't know if it's in the Old Testament, but in the old manuscripts it's called the Natsal. It means the same thing, a catching up. So yeah, the word rapture is only from the Latin. And in English, just to name it, we just call it a rapture. So good evening, everyone, and Dr. Ken. Does the Dead Sea Scrolls specify creation? The earth was created in 6 to 7 days, Adam's creation. Yes, they do, actually. Their theology taught that there is a seven-day creation period, and they were 24-hour days. And you see the same thing from Josephus and the church fathers. And the idea behind it, the reason why they mention it is because it's important to them, And it's not so much the creation part, but God could have created everything like that. So why did he take 7 days? And their whole concept is because that's how the calendar is based. The sun, moon, and stars were created on the 4th day. So on the weekly schedule, that's Wednesday. So on Wednesday, it's always the first day of the new year. And it's a 364-day calendar, so it repeats perfectly every year, which is an amazing calendar because you can tell me 3 days after they did this, somebody did something. I automatically know what day it was, if it was a Sabbath, how close it was to the next Sabbath, how close it was to a festival, what they would have been preparing for, or what would have been going on, just instantly. Whereas the modern Jewish calendar, you really don't know. You'd have to go try to calculate it out, use a computer basically. So it's a fascinating system. So that was important to them. It's really important, like it says in Genesis, that we observe the 7-day Sabbath. And it means cycle, basically, rather than not a ritual like the Jews do, like the lighting of the candles or whatever, but to keep the calendar system so we're not in the dark. When you have a calendar, if I told you I was going to be at your house 2 days before Christmas, if we have the same calendar, you know exactly when I'm walking in your door. And if we don't have the same calendar, you're clueless. You don't know what a Christmas is even. That's a calendar thing. So if we keep the calendar system, we instantly know a lot of stuff. And that has just been given to us, finally recreated back in, I don't know, it's been like 5 years or so. So it's really new information if you think about it. So yeah, they would believe everything was created in the 6 days. The 7th day is the Sabbath, which is our Saturday. There's no way we can prove that it hasn't been tampered with or changed, but we can prove by the Gregorian calendar that our 7-day cycle is the same as it was when it was created, and that was about 40 BC. So in the 1st century AD, you have the Essenes telling us that the calendar creation is identical, it's unbroken up to their time. And the Romans made fun of the Jews because they had their weekly Saturnalia instead of a monthly one. You know, at the end of the year, they have this party, this Sabbath type thing of rest in the Jewish cycle. So they made fun of the Jews for having one every week. So in the process of doing that, it lets you know that our Saturday is the same Saturday that it's always been. It's unbroken. So since that, if that's true, we can recreate the calendar pretty easy. Some say the angels caused the void leaving heaven in Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, and the earth was already made. I can see where you get stuff like that. There's nothing that directly says it. And to me, it should be mentioned by somebody directly somewhere. And the thing is, whether we did or did not have a pre-Adamic world, the creation or recreation, whatever you want to call it, starts with Genesis 1:2 at least, and starts with Adam's creation. So we're talking about a creation or a recreation, but that first week, and so Adam would have been created on a Friday, that first Friday, the 6th day of that cycle, and going from there. And when he was 130 years old, Seth was born. Doesn't matter how many years he spent in the Garden of Eden or anything like that. So there's a lot of theories, like there might be millions of years between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. Maybe Adam was in the Garden of Eden for 5 millennia, and then aging started when he got out. You know, there's all those different theories, but according to the calendar, we don't know anything behind creation week, and creation week is specific down to the day. And from when he was created, that first Friday in that first year, 130 Earth years or 130 spring equinoxes, Seth was born. So you could just kind of go through. It's actually, if you believe their interpretation, it's a really easy system. So anyway, I personally don't believe in a pre-Adamic world, but again, I can't disprove it either. I would like it if such a thing existed. I would like somebody to find a scroll that said there was a pre-Adamic world. They looked like this. Their headquarters were over here. The land masses were different. The first president was called this. Just give us some history. And that wouldn't be too hard to do, from a prophet. But I haven't seen anything like that. Dr. Donita Johnson, will you and Ken please pray for my son Nathan? He is a believer, but has now turned his back on Israel and wants to quit attending evangelical churches. Ooh, yeah, somebody's got to him and confused him a lot. Let's say a prayer for him real quick. Father, we just ask that you speak to Nathan's heart, remind him of you and your kingdom, make your presence known to him in a very real manner so that he realizes he's being brainwashed by someone or some group. Help him to come back to a true faith. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. You'll have to let us know what happens. Question: if a believer can walk away from God and lose their salvation, what happens to the sealing of the Holy Spirit? Can you give a scripture reference? That's something that's talked about by a lot of us in Calvary chapels. Even there's some of us that believe you can lose your salvation, and some of us that believe you can't. And I think the main idea, Satan tries to hit us with these things to cause division. So if you could possibly lose your salvation, you're not going to accidentally do it. You're going to have to on purpose walk away. If you love the Lord and are trying to live a righteous life, even if you're doing a bad job at it, you're serving him. He is pleased with your effort to try to make progress. So you're not going to accidentally lose your salvation. If you don't care, you possibly have lost it, but a good argument can be made that you never had it to begin with. So it's one of those things. It's just like my friends in the holiness movement. They say that you need to become entirely sanctified so that you're sinlessly perfect. And most of us don't believe you can be sinlessly perfect in this life. I'm pretty close. No, I'm just kidding. Ask my wife. She'll tell you, yeah, no. But seriously, though, the whole idea is if I want to be holy and I am going to try my best, if it's possible that I could become sinless, then I will be. If it's not possible, I'm still going to be pretty close because I'm going to try my best. So in a case like that, if the Lord makes it where I can't be perfect, he's not going to hold that against me as far as losing my salvation or whatever. So again, we divide on these things, your eternal security and you're not, and your entire sanctification and you're not, and you're this and you're not. And those are things that Satan really tries to get us to, lose focus on. And so we got to be careful of that. When I was raised that you can lose your salvation. And at one point I went through and I saw some good verses on both sides. And I thought, well, I'm going to make a chart. I think I still have that somewhere, but a chart of all the verses that look like you can lose your salvation and all the verses that look like you can't. And obviously I'm looking at least one set of these wrong because it looks like they contradict. So I went through each one to see, could they possibly be saying something different? And I realized that most of them could. And so I'm still, kind of not on the fence in that sense, but I believe that I'm not going to lose my salvation because I care about the Lord and he cares about me. He went through an incredible amount just to get me saved. He's not going to let me just slip through his fingers. And I definitely don't want to. The other thing that you have to ask, my son mentions this all the time. He says, maybe technically you can lose your salvation by walking away. And if you know the Lord and you know about salvation, who in their right mind would walk away? And if you're not in your right mind, would you even be judged properly? According to the old law, you wouldn't be judged if you're not in your right mind. So there's a lot of different questions. I don't mean to skirt the issue. I honestly don't know if I could become sinlessly perfect in this life, if I could lose my salvation or not. But in my mind, it doesn't matter. I'm going to serve the Lord to the best of my ability, and I'm not going to worry about it because I don't think I will. So the other thing about that, if you're struggling with sin, there's a lot of things that cause problems, and you need really good counseling maybe to overcome trauma or other things like that. There might be a lot of things involved in the sin nature, or an addiction to something, a physical addiction. So those are things that we have to work for. In Hebrews, it talks about if you decide you're going to willfully sin anyway, you're going to do what you're going to do and nobody's going to stop me attitude, and you are a Christian, the Lord will chastise you. You will be disciplined. And if you can walk in sin and really honestly don't feel disciplined, you're not a Christian. Is what Hebrews, it's 12 or 13. And then John 1 John 5 talks about there is a way that you can know that you currently have eternal life. So if I could lose it and get it back, and lose it and get it back, and lose it and get it back, I really don't know if I have eternal life. It depends on what I'm doing when I die, which stage I would be in. So you can look at the scriptures and see a lot of scriptures that show you the two extremes. If someone is walking in sin and they don't care, they're not a Christian. Maybe they never were, but they're not, or they're being chastised internally and not telling people about it. But either way, we need to try to reconcile or get people like that saved. Hopefully that helps. Why does the text go from speaking to an angel that Ezra calls Lord, and then goes to what it seems like God speaking, because he says, my judgments? It's a good question. It could just be the way the text was translated. Could be talking about the angel of the Lord, or the angel could be talking about the Lord's judgments. I see that in a lot of manuscripts. I seem to see that in some of the Old Testament too. I'm not sure that it means anything per se, but it does kind of make you wonder about that stuff. I always wonder if maybe it got mistranslated or whatever. What is so special about the Geneva Bible? Anybody know? The Geneva Bible was the first Protestant Bible put together. I believe it might be the first one that was not using any Latin, because when they first tried to put these together with Tyndale and on through, they would try to use the Greek and the Hebrew because those are the original languages. And if they didn't have a book, they would use Latin. And then as we go through time, more and more pieces of the stuff got through, and they're all Greek and Hebrew now. The Geneva Bible then was the first Protestant edition. So basically you have the Catholics in the Middle Ages telling people, don't read the Bible, period. You'll get confused. And so they had the Bible in Latin, but that was it. The Protestants decided, we've got to be able to read the Bible or we'll never know anything. So Tyndale and Wycliffe and all these guys started putting the Bibles together, and they got more and more accurate because they got less and less Latin. Not that Latin's bad, it's just if you can get to the first century manuscript original language, that's got to be more accurate than the other translation, or a translation of a translation of a translation. That's where you get into a lot of trouble. So the Geneva Bible was pretty cool in that way. You can look at a King James 1611 and the Geneva 1599. They're a little different here and there, but they're really, really close. I mean, it could very easily be one or the other. Now, what King James did is he said, well, what happened is the Geneva Bible's put together, and the footnotes are extremely anti-Roman Catholic. So the Roman Catholics at a certain point decided, okay, we'll make an English Bible too, and it became known as the Reims Dewey. And it was, they're all basically the same. The text is the text, but it had extremely anti-Protestant notes in it. So King James said, we're going to have Catholics, we're going to have Protestants, we're going to have Anglicans, we're going to come together, going to make a good translation, going to be no notes at all, unless it's something like Jerusalem. That's a city in Israel, some geographic or some note or a spelling or something. but nothing anti-Catholic, nothing anti-Protestant. And then that's going to be the official Bible for everybody, period. So that's what King James did. So the Geneva Bible was the Protestant, Reims Dewey was the Catholic, and the King James 1611 is the compromise of the two. So I think that's mainly it. And again, the text is almost identical all the way through on all of them. And if there is a problem with it, it's usually because that part was translated from Latin, finally from the Greek. So that's the main idea. Good questions. Super chat, $20. Thank you. Thank you very much for the donation and being in the chat room. Chuck Missler stated that the 2 legs, 2 feet were Eastern and Western Roman Empire. But what if the 10 toes, 5 on each feet, refer to Islam, Sunni, and Shiite? Think of Ezekiel 38 being mostly Muslim. That's a possibility. It's just the Roman Empire part is just that they're in that area. And if you think of the Roman Empire, it was originally pagan and then became Christian and then broke and became Greek Orthodox Greek Orthodox as opposed to Latin Roman Catholic. And then when it fell to the Ottomans, it became Muslim. And then finally in 1917 or 45, depending on how you count it, fizzled out. So the religions don't seem to make any difference in the empire. It's still the empire, pagan, Christian, and then Muslim. So the fact that there would be 2 sides, a Latin and a Greek if it's Christian, or a Sunni and a Shiite if it's Islam, as long as it's the empire on 2 sides. So that's something to think about anyway. And again, going back to Gad the Seer, seemingly to indicate a faction from Roman Catholicism and a faction from Islam. Don't know what faction it would be. Would the Sunni be more likely to be friendly to Roman Catholicism than the Shia? Probably, but you don't know. Or maybe the Alawites. One interesting thing about that, they all say that Allah has never incarnated in human form and wouldn't. That would be blasphemy. So there is no Jesus being God incarnate type thing, except the Alawite community, which is a very small group of Muslims. The Alawites believe that Allah, and I don't know the story to it, but at one time did incarnate in human form and may do it again, because their idea is that God could do whatever God wants to do. So a little more logical in that sense. So what I always thought was interesting is that Assad, the former ruler of Syria, was Alawite. And since the Antichrist is supposed to come from a country north of Israel, that very well could be Syria, it's Alawite in rulership, those guys would very easily accept the Antichrist saying, I'm God incarnate, or Allah incarnate, or whatever, you know. But now it's being taken over by ISIS type people, which seems to be indicated towards the end of the Ezra Apocalypse as something that happens to Syria, because there's a very important tie with Syria and with Russia at a certain point in history. Anyway, according to that, not the 3-headed eagle one, but this is a different prophecy in there. So it's something to think about, but there's something along those lines. And we're assuming that the statue is not deformed, that there's actually, 5 toes on one foot and 5 toes on another, not 6 and 4. I would assume it would tell us that if that's the case, and then that would give us a clue that there's 6 nations on one and 4 on the other, or something like that. It seems like it's 5 and 5. Okay, next question is, do you view the Ancient of Days in Daniel as Jesus in Revelation chapter 1? I always thought of the Ancient of Days as the Father, and then one likened unto him comes and sits with him, would probably be Jesus. But you're talking about a Trinity, so it's kind of the same thing. But yeah, I would say it's definitely the Father, and Jesus, and sitting on the thrones. It's the judgment at that point. Okay, last question for tonight. Chuck Missler emphasized that it was actually a Syrian cohort that was tasked with the actual destruction of Jerusalem, and that the Antichrist could be a Syrian. What are your thoughts? Yeah, I know that was at least partially true, as far as like there were major groups of the surrounding areas, and Syria was a big part of it at that time. The prophecies in Daniel 11 talk about the Antichrist being the king of the north. He's from a country north of Israel. So he's actually the prince or king or dictator or whatever, president or whatever, of a country north of Israel. So that would be Lebanon, Syria, possibly Iraq, possibly Turkey, possibly the Stans in Russia, just anywhere north of that way. There's another prophecy in the Ezra Apocalypse we haven't got to yet that tells us it's definitely not Turkey, where the Antichrist is from, that is. So, and there's another set of prophecies where they talk about the Antichrist being of the tribe of Dan. And that's either saying he's a direct descendant of a Danite, which would mean nothing to us because I don't know if you're a Danite or not. I don't know how we could even prove that by genetic tests or whatever. However, if you were born in the ancient area of what used to be Dan, if you're a Danite in that sense of that area, that could be. And the old area for Dan is northern Israel, southern Syria, and a little part of Lebanon. So that area right there. So if he's the king of a country north of Israel that is connected with the old tribe land of Dan, he has to be a Syrian or a Lebanese guy. Now, one of the church fathers says the first war that he fights is, out of all the different wars, the very first one is in Beirut, Lebanon. So Beirut is always going to continue to be an area of major disaster. That makes it sound like he's not the president there, although he could be, I suppose. But all of that together makes me think he's from Syria. So we'll find out for sure. But that's a lot of prophecies pulled together, but we'll look at those in the near future. So yeah, very well could be. So, okay, we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight, and we'll come back next week and continue with our Ezra study and see where we go from there. Thank you guys, and you have a great week. Oh, stay inside, stay out of the cold, stay warm. God bless.